Hello, and a very good morning from Leeds. Now, I've got something a bit different for you this week. Today, we'll be having a bit of a Trans-Pennine showdown, comparing what it's like to travel on the two train operators that operate services between the North's two largest cities, Leeds and Manchester, that being Northern and TransPennine Express. So, starting with the latter, let's let this showdown commence and head across the Pennines. Well, I'm not gonna lie, when I saw all these people waiting on platform 16 for a 3-car train, I wasn't particularly looking forward to the journey that laid ahead. This service we'll be taking is the delayed 1000 service to Liverpool Lime Street, which originated in Hull. Now, ordinarily I would complain about it being late, however, if it hadn't been, I would have missed it and would have had to wait for the next one, so maybe it's a good thing for once. Anyway, around 2/3 of Trans-Pennine Express's services between Leeds and Manchester's Victoria station are operated by these Class 185 Siemens Desiro diesel multiple units. The other services mainly consist of the newer bi-mode Class 802 Nova 1 sets, with the occasional service being operated by the loco-hauled Nova 3 sets. I've covered both of these in the past, so feel free to check out those videos in your own time, but for now, it's time to partake in the rush to get on board and try and grab myself a seat, something that seems to be a somewhat coveted prize on Trans-Pennine Express these days. Oh, happy days, managed to bag myself one of the last seats. Not gonna lie though, I feel pretty bad for the poor, unlucky people. They've got to spend the next 50 minutes or so to Manchester standing. Capacity does seem to be a very prominent problem on this route. Speaking of the route, Trans-Pennine Express's services between Leeds and Manchester operate on the Huddersfield line, which is sometimes also known as the North Trans-Pennine route, with this journey seeing us cover around 42 miles.
Right, ladies and gents, good morning, welcome everyone that's just piled on there at Leeds. This is the 10 o'clock service to Liverpool Lime Street.
I will say, if you are lucky enough to bag yourself a seat, then you're in for a rather enjoyable trip. These seats are, in my opinion, one of the best standard class seats out there at the moment. They are really comfortable, feature a generous amount of legroom, and offer these nice little tray tables, and even come equipped with both regular and USB plug sockets, although these are shared between each pair of seats. While these trains do jolt around quite a bit, the movements are at least quite smooth, providing a fairly good overall ride quality. In addition to 154 standard class seats, there's also a small first class section that can accommodate up to 15 passengers. These trains also have spaces for up to 2 wheelchair users, and have bicycle spaces at the other end of the train which are free to use. When these aren't in use, they provide space for 12 fold-out seats for standard class passengers to use on busier services such as this one. These Class 185 units also have 2 toilets for you to go and spend a penny in, with the one next to the wheelchair spaces being large and accessible. And yeah, they were pretty good really. Nice and clean, and everything being well stocked and working as intended. Rounding off the onboard facilities, Trans-Pennine Express also offer an at-seat buy-on-board catering service in standard class, and a complimentary drinks and snacks service in first class. These trains are also equipped with complimentary Wi-Fi, although honestly it wasn't that great for browsing. That said, it can be used to access the onboard entertainment system through your phone, which is a very nice touch in my opinion. The scenery as we cross the Pennines is pretty impressive though. I always think that this is one of the more picturesque parts of England, and I consider myself very lucky to have all of this on my doorstep. If you're fortunate enough to find yourself on a quieter service and have the choice, it's best to sit on the left-hand side of the train, as, in my opinion, that's where the best views are to be had.
To check you have everything with you. Don't forget any bags or...
Around 17 miles and 17 minutes after leaving Leeds, we arrive at our first stop in the town of Huddersfield, which is actually where I was born, in the town's hospital that is, though obviously not the station. After Huddersfield, we pass through Standedge Tunnel, which, at roughly 3.2 miles long, is the longest tunnel on our route from Leeds to Manchester. There are actually 4 Standedge tunnels that all run parallel to one another. Besides the railway tunnel, one carries the Huddersfield Narrow Canal, with the other 2 being disused railway tunnels. After emerging from the tunnel's western portal, we get some quite nice views of the aforementioned canal. Our next and final stop before Manchester is Stalybridge, where we can see the work that is already underway to electrify the entirety of the Huddersfield line from Manchester to Leeds and even extending onto York and the East Coast Main Line. While it currently seems a bit hazy as to when the work will be complete, it's good to see that this is at least being done, and it'll be interesting to see what this means for services once the work is complete.
Trans-Pennine Express service to Liverpool Lime Street.
Shortly after Stalybridge, the city of Manchester comes into view, and before we know it, we're pulling into Victoria Station.
This is Manchester Victoria.
After a brief stop to take in the lovely old tiled map of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway and the quaint wooden ticket sales counters, it's time to head back across the Pennines. Travelling with Northern, we'll be taking the 11:20 service to Leeds, which is currently running on time and originated in Chester, although the platform we'll be departing from is currently occupied by another pair of Trans-Pennine Express Class 185s, which are about to go whence we came via Huddersfield to Leeds. Again, about 2/3 of Northern services between Manchester and Leeds are operated by a single type of train, that being the relatively new Class 195 CAF Civity units. For services that originate or terminate in Wigan, it will usually be an older Class 158 Express Sprinter unit that shows up. For both types, the train will be formed of either a single 3-car unit or 2 2-car units coupled together, with the former being the case for us today. As you might have expected, these Northern trains feature a slightly more dense seating layout than their Trans-Pennine Express counterparts, with these 3-car sets featuring 204 seats, albeit in a standard class only configuration. Now, much to my surprise, this train was actually pretty devoid of people as Northern services go, although by this point it was almost lunchtime, so perhaps this played a part. Another thing that differs from our outbound leg is the route we'll be taking, with Northern services to Leeds utilising the Calder Valley line, operating via Halifax and Bradford. The journey is also quite a bit longer, with it scheduled to take 1 hour and 22 minutes, to cover the just under 50 miles back to Leeds.
Welcome aboard this Northern service to Leeds.
Now, I don't think that the seats on these trains are all that comfortable. Well, I will say that they have worn in a little bit since these trains first entered service a few years ago. They're still rather hard and poorly shaped. Couple this with the rather rattly and bumpy ride quality of these trains, and it's not all that uncommon to have a bit of a sore backside by the time you get off. That said though, these seats still offer a fairly good amount of legroom, even with someone sitting opposite you, and you'll still find a regular plug socket underneath the seat. Quite a lot of the seats are arranged in bays of 4, which also get access to one of these nice big tables. These trains also featured 2 spaces for wheelchair users, and again, bicycle spaces can be found towards the front of the train. As I touched on earlier, there's no first class on this train, and nor is there any form of onboard catering, although I wouldn't have expected either of these from an operator whose services are generally 2 hours and under in length. Somewhat strangely for a 3-car unit, there was only 1 toilet available on the train, which can be found next to the wheelchair spaces. Now, while I get that they probably did this to cram in a few extra seats, it does mean that it's not uncommon to have to queue to use it, and they're more prone to becoming dirty quicker. However, no such issues here, with everything being immaculately clean and working as intended. Lastly, these trains are also Wi-Fi enabled, although it's also not particularly fast on here either. In fact, my usual speed test wouldn't even work.
This is Rochdale.
Once again, the views as we traverse the Calder Valley line are very picturesque, with the lush green hills and the spectacularly sunny spring day allowing for a very pleasant trip. I must say I love the heritage design of Hebden Bridge Station, and keep an eye out for the old signal box on the right as we depart. The signal box here dates back to Victorian times, and was still in use as recently as 2018. Since its closure, funding has been provided to the local community trust to preserve it in its current state for many years to come. As we stop in Halifax, just opposite the station we can see the town's Nestlé factory, where confectionery such as Quality Streets and After Eights chocolates are produced. Between Halifax and Bradford, we catch a glimpse of Emily Moor Mast off in the distance, but more on that in next week's video. After a brief stop in Lowmore, we pull into Bradford Interchange, which is my local station. We'll have to reverse directions here in Bradford in order to complete the last little bit of our journey into Leeds.
Aboard this Northern service to Leeds. The next station stop is New Pudsey.
Well, as we approach Leeds and the end of this little showdown, I think it's time to reflect and compare. For me, the 5 most important points on any train trip are comfort, occupancy, amenities, punctuality, and of course, the cost. So those are the points I will be comparing the 2 experiences on. Starting with Trans-Pennine Express and comfort, which I'll be rating out of 10 by the way. As I said earlier, I thought the seats were great and spacious, with plenty of legroom provided and, most importantly, no sore backsides upon alighting. While the train did move around quite a bit at times, the ride quality in general was good, earning Trans-Pennine Express's Siemens Desiro sets a solid 8 out of 10 in the comfort category. As for the Northern seats, well, it was sore backsides aplenty, thanks to the seats' padding, or rather lack of it, and the rather bumpy and rattly ride quality. That said though, the seats do still offer good legroom, nice big tables, and while they're still by no means good, they're a little bit more comfortable than when these trains first entered service, probably thanks to the fact that they've been worn in quite a bit. Still though, I think a 4 out of 10 would be a fair score in the comfort category for the Class 195s. While the Class 185s certainly had the better seats, what good are they if there aren't enough to go around? I've briefly put a little explanation of how I'll be rating occupancy up on screen now. Feel free to pause the video should you want to study that in more detail. For the Leeds to Manchester leg, I'd definitely say that occupancy was high, with pretty much all of the seats taken. That said, while there were people standing, it wasn't exactly a case of people being crammed in like sardines either. The Northern service fared much better here, with most seats remaining vacant for much of the trip, therefore earning it a very low occupancy rating. In terms of onboard amenities, the Trans-Pennine Express Class 185s have loads on offer for what is essentially a regional express train, with both standard and first class seating, a mobile onboard catering trolley which came around regularly, plenty of plug sockets, 2 wheelchair spaces, 2 toilets, and even onboard entertainment. That said though, for a regional train, I still think that the Northern sets fare pretty well in this aspect, with there being more seats per unit than we had on the Trans-Pennine Express train, and there were still amenities such as Wi-Fi and plug sockets. My only real complaint with the Northern trains was that there was only 1 toilet per unit. In my opinion, a 3-car unit should really have 2 toilets. Now, Trans-Pennine Express have come under a lot of scrutiny lately for the punctuality of their services. That said, of the 44 services that they were scheduled to operate between Leeds and Victoria on the day we travelled, 32 of them, or around 73%, arrived on time. That said though, 5 services, or around 11% of trains, were cancelled, which does seem like a fair bit in my opinion. Northern fared a bit better in this regard. Of the 49 services that they were scheduled to run between Manchester and Leeds, 38 or around 76% arrived on time, with no cancellations at all on the day that we travelled. Which finally brings us nicely onto the cost. Travelling between the 2 cities on Trans-Pennine Express starts at around £8.60 for an advanced single, or £5.65 with a rail card. However, the Northern services are quite a bit cheaper, starting at £2.20 and £3.50 with and without a rail card respectively, which is excellent value for money in my opinion. As for which is better, well, I think that comes down to personal preference really. For me, while the two both have their strengths and weaknesses, I think I just about prefer what Trans-Pennine Express have to offer. However, Mrs. Travel Reports, who accompanied me on this trip, said she definitely preferred the return leg on Northern, so I guess the real question is here, are you team Mr. or Mrs. Travel Reports? Do let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you'd like to see more of these comparison videos in the future. I've really enjoyed making this one, so if you like the format, I could potentially see it turning into a bit of a series, as there are loads of different operators that I can think of that'd be worth comparing. Anyway, given that we're now just pulling into Leeds Station, I think that's enough of you hearing my voice for 1 week. In the meantime though, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a like, comment and subscribe to the channel, as all of them help me out immensely. Special thanks as always goes to my fantastic patrons and channel members. If you want to join them in supporting the channel from just £1, $1 or €1 per month, then you'll find the relevant links in the description below. With that, all that's left for me to say is thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you all next Friday.